Welcome to Succession Planning for CRCs, the program that helps you to identify and most importantly implement a succession plan for your community resource centre. My name's Andrew Huffer. Today I'm joined by the most magnificent John Denton. Welcome aboard, John.
Good day, Andrew. Pleasure to be here again.
And today we're blessed with the presence of Lee Steele, who's travelled all the way from the Pingelly CRC to help us today.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm great. Thank you.
Things all looking rosy in Pingelly at the moment?
Yep, it's still raining and we're still looking towards a good season, so town's pretty great.
So we're into now episode 4, which is focusing on implementation in our 5-episode program. And I just want to quickly recap on the territory we've covered previously when we talked about information management back in episode 3. The critical things we focused on there were being able to get an efficient approach and making real world savings for your CRC through having a good information management system. So you're not wasting that 15 minutes that Lee referred to constantly every day trying to search for information. We also gave you some key steps on how to develop your system and also talked about how it can assist you in succession planning by making sure everyone understands what's where and who can access it and where. Today, we're going to go into the territory of implementation. So we're going to be looking at transition strategies for both board members and for staff. We'll also be talking about what to do in the case of a sudden departure when someone takes off or when you have a crisis turn up, whether it be a flood, a fire or anything else. We'll also be talking a wee bit about interim management plans and how they can help you get through those times of mini crisis and thinking about what are some of the key things we need to do in terms of maintaining the operations of our CRC. So some really critical information that can help you pretty much get through anything, anytime. John, I want you to kick us off by helping us through what to do in terms of board transition strategies and thinking about what's required and how that's going to help us. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Let's talk about the board and transitioning people to and from the board. The key thing here is to identify what the key positions are on the board and where the vulnerabilities are for the CRC. So normally the key positions would be the office bearers on the board. So the secretary, obviously the chairperson, vice chair, treasurer, they would be the most critical because they probably require a little bit more skill than some of the other positions. So first of all, identify what the key positions are and then start to put some sort of strategy in place to transition people into and out of those roles. So it requires a bit of planning and preparation. And one of the things to think about when you're thinking about, well, what do those key positions require? Look at the skills and the knowledge that are required in those positions. And in a previous series, we talked about a skills matrix and developing a skills matrix. So briefly, look at what skills are required, what knowledge is required to hold those key positions, and then look at if you've got other people that you can start to groom into those positions and develop them in those skills and knowledge. So it's all about grooming people and transitioning people just to cover the vulnerabilities and the risk in the CRC. And I know, talking to Lee earlier, this is something that they've done at Pingelly as well. So Lee, just give us a few words on that if you would, please.
The transitioning process is really important. For the first few years of our CRC, we actually didn't identify it as an important part of our process for keeping a sustainable CRC. So we would wait for the night of the AGM, everyone would turn up, people from the floor would put their hand up, everyone would vote, everyone would shake their hands and congratulate each other and go home. Well, one year we just didn't think about who was getting on the board and the impact that had, the lack of skills that were needed that weren't there anymore, and the dynamics that it did when it changed the board. So after that, we really became more strategic in focusing on our board transitions and our strategies in place, making sure that we were on the lookout all the time for key people who could take over those positions. And then we introduced the opportunity to have some small subgroups so that people could get involved without actually being on the board. We got a little bit of suck and see opportunity, if I can say that, and that works really well for us. So transitioning time is very important. If you know someone on your board is coming up, to step down, then please take the time. It's one of the critical things, because if your board's not running properly, then it just flows back down through the whole of the organisation.
Sure, and most board positions, well, all board positions will have a term specified in the Constitution. So in that respect, there should be no surprises in that you know when people will be coming up for re-election or re-nomination to the board. And again, it's about knowing the long-term plans of your people as well. What you're trying to avoid is any sudden changes that are going to disrupt the operations of the CRC. So, you know, by getting to know, this is really the chairperson's role, to get to know everybody that's on the board and what their personal long-term plans are. Because it's important to know if people are going to be leaving town or if they've got plans to go interstate, something like that. And so we don't always take the time to get to know people at a deeper level and know what their aspirations and goals and plans are. And in any management leadership position, whether it be in a business or a not-for-profit organisation, it's very important these days to have that conversation and that depth of knowledge about your key people so that you can plan for it. Lee, any comments to make on that, or Andrew?
Long-term plans are very important, because if someone's putting their hand up to take a role in your board and you're expecting them to be there for 3 years or 2 years, and they're planning a 8-month holiday during that because they're retired or something, that's just too long to be out of an organisation to be able to contribute. It's okay if you're aware of it and you can put things in place, but it's no use finding out at the meeting that they're heading off next week. So really should be talking about your long-term plans across your board. And it's important because it may mean that they may just take a different role on your board for a short period of time. Doesn't mean that they have to get off or that their passion is any less important. Just means that you can plan around that.
Absolutely, that's very important. And again, you know, handing over the chair at meetings occasionally to other board members to get them learning new skills and learning what's involved in chairing meetings as well. As Lee already mentioned, a good way to start transitioning people into roles is to start to introduce them to activities in the CRC or subcommittees. And subcommittees are a great way for people to start to understand the values and the culture of the organisation, of the CRC, and what it's all about. And on the other side, it's an ideal opportunity for the board to get to know those people as well in terms of their values, what they stand for, and how committed they would be if they were to later on transition into one of those key positions. So Lee, I know that's something that you do down at Pingelly.
Yep, and it is important because it makes you look at what their involvement's going to be and whether they really want to be in that space. You remove the people who just want to come to a meeting every month and have a cup of tea and vote and not actually be actively involved. Doesn't mean that they become hands-on and they're micromanaging, but it means that they have a much better understanding of what's happening as a whole, even down to getting people to step in and chair a meeting occasionally, makes them understand how difficult that task can be, and lets them decide whether they want to get involved in that level. So same with subcommittees, before they actually get on your committee, it's really good to invite them, and don't just have one that's for picking the colour of the carpet. Make it substantial and make it that they can be involved in it and that they see the processes that the CRC has in place.
Excellent points. It's about thinking about heirs apparent, people who can develop the skills and get the knowledge to take up some of those positions. So anoint them, give them a tap on the shoulder and let them know that you feel they would be very valuable on the board and filling those roles. And occasionally maybe get them to act as deputies. So if they're existing board members, as Lee said, you know, when somebody's on leave, then get somebody to stand in to that role so that they start to get a feel for the role and what's required. So anything on that, Lee or Andrew, before we talk about staff transition?
I just reckon that's a really great strategy, John, that you've identified there. It's simple, it's non-threatening, and it can give people a bit of confidence, I think, just to step up. And it's a bit of the look over your shoulder approach to see how other people do things, get a sense of what I'd do if I was in the same position, and maybe some of the things that I'd change if I was moving into that role. So I think it's a really good, simple strategy which would cost the CRC nothing. So good idea.
The change bit's really important because you might actually introduce someone to a subcommittee and they bring a totally different train of thought or a suggestion on how something could happen. So it also brings that outside influence into the board and into the CRC itself without taking a controlling influence.
So we've looked at there the key positions within the board and transitioning people and keeping that whole transition happening for the longer term. So what about staff transitions, Andrew?
I want to pick up on what you were talking about earlier, John, in terms of getting to know your team. And you said sometimes it can be a bit awkward in getting to know some of that personal information of people, but I think it's pretty important to have an understanding of who's around the CRC for the long haul and for who it might be just maybe a stepping stone to something else. And from a staff perspective, it could be, and there's no right or wrong in this. You might have a trainee who's in there just to pick up some initial skills that maybe, say, financial management and looking to maybe move into a local accounting firm after that. And I think that's fine as long as perhaps that the open conversation's been held about where you see yourself moving in this role and with these skills in the future. Lee, I'd be interested to know, just to put you on the spot here, about are those conversations held either in your CRC or in other ones that you're aware of?
They are held now in our CRC, and putting my staff hat on, I'd have to say that when it was first floated that we should be doing that sort of thing, I was a little bit precious because it's like, are they doing this so they can get rid of me? Are they doing this because they don't want me in that space anymore? And so once I understood the process and there was a trust built between us, it was very easy to have that conversation. Yeah, I do want to retire, and yes, I'd like to take more time off. I've actually stepped down my hours that I do at the CRC through having those conversations, through allowing the board to make decisions so that they could help me achieve what I wanted to do. It took me a little while to realise that it was all for the good and not really there that they were going to get me in some way. So if you're invited to have the conversation, please make sure you have it, because it'll take a lot of stress off you too, because I felt like I couldn't have days off because what would happen if I wasn't there, and would they miss me? And I actually realised that I'm part of a big team and I was an important part, and that's why they were having the conversations with me, not because they had any other ulterior motives.
Good call. And to me, it also brings up the issue of thinking about this is all about working for the good of the business, in this case the CRC, and to me the best staff member you can have is somebody who works for the good of your business. And I think those conversations help bring that out a bit, to really see where they see themselves fitting and how they're going to bring their own plans and connect them to that, and making sure that it's not about me as much anymore, that it is actually about the group I work with and the group I work for.
Actually underwrites that team environment, because you're having that discussion. It's not a secret or something that's planned outside in in a back room or something. Everybody's working towards it, and we're all working towards that process and that strategy, because we want the CRC to succeed. We want it to be an indication of what great things we did achieve whilst we were there. So it's not about being precious in that spot, it's about just helping people make good decisions. And if you're not honest when you ask those questions, they can't make good decisions either. So please take the step and start the discussions. Even if your board hasn't approached you yet, perhaps you should take the initiative and go towards them and say, well, I'd like to put some things in place and have an understanding of what strategies are there if something in my CRC is going to happen. And my biggest problem is I know that I'm not the healthiest person on the block. And so the strategy for me was that I don't plan on going anywhere, but the plan might be taken from me and something might happen. And I want to make sure that lives past whatever I've contributed to it, that it goes on to continue to do great things.
Absolutely. And then that's a really good point. I think equally as much as asking people about their plans is helping them to do those great things by actually thinking about who in the staff we're going to develop and how we're going to do it. And I always bring up my favourite quote from a fellow called Tom O'Toole, who ran the Beechworth Bakery. And if you get the opportunity to get that DVD out, it's a great snapshot about motivating a team and how to get people on board with you. And Tom was running a bakery in a small town in country Victoria, and he's putting a lot of resources and money into training his staff. And the question was asked of him, well, what if you train them and they leave? And Tom's response is, or what if they don't and they stay? And so there's a bit of silence there for a moment. It's like, oh yeah, good point. So to me, I think a lot of the time you're always going to get a return on investing your staff, and it sounds like a bit of a tired sort of saying, but I've certainly found it in our cafe and catering business that people really respond well to us investing in them. And we sent one of our staff members away on a program to help her delegate better, and she come back flash full of new ideas. There's other people on the program, and she just took her performance to another level. And she was one of the career people we wanted there, and certainly took that further on. So we were getting paid back multiple times of what we invested there. John, you've been in a business that's actually developed staff, and is that the sort of thing you saw from people investing in that side of things?
Absolutely, Andrew. The more organisations, and it's been proven by research, Harvard Business Review publishes articles quite regularly on this kind of thing, and it's now accepted that the organisations and businesses that invest in their people, develop them, grow them, they tend to retain those people. So now you're not only getting the benefit of the training, but you're getting the benefit of retaining really key staff. So couldn't endorse it any stronger than that.
And I just want to reinforce a couple of things that John and Lee, you both mentioned earlier, in terms of extending opportunities for new people to get involved in the CRC, whether it be on subcommittees or getting involved in coming along to the AGMs, or even some people are having open days for their CRCs or theme days, whatever it is, just to think about some opportunities that you could utilise to bring new people in, or people with different ideas, or Lee mentioned it, just a different perspective in that can help your CRC grow. We've mentioned also in previous episodes about the value of mentoring, and when we talked about transitioning before, just to have that opportunity for staff as well as board members to have that sort of hand on the shoulder approach to help people who are coming into a new role, and to just give them a few tips and clues there. And also, I've seen CRCs use mentors from outside the CRCs, not necessarily an employee, but could be someone who's either retired or a professional around the community who can assist staff members with dealing with certain areas. Lee, have you seen that used in CRCs that you've worked with or seen before?
Actually, I just came across it recently where a CRC had a mentoring program happening with their new manager, and it was the CEO of the local shire. Even though the CEO and the shire themselves weren't actually involved in that CRC, everyone recognised the importance of its place in the community and happily provided support and mentoring for that new worker. And that blew me away. I thought that's what we're all about, the whole of community, the whole of our lifestyle. So yeah, look around, take a step out in your community, and if you think there's someone there, approach them, because you might really be surprised, because sometimes it's just about making a difference on that local level and they want to do it. Yeah,
and to me, I think a lot of people enjoy probably the appeal to their ego about actually being asked to be a mentor, because I think that really puts you up in a higher position and shows that people really value the skills you have and want to learn from that. So
yeah, and the strategy of putting it in place prior to identifying some key people they can approach, to make sure that they approach the right people. Because sometimes if they're new to your community and they're not aware, there are some people that can take a space up and take a lot of time of someone, but actually don't contribute a lot. And I'm sure you all have someone like that in your town somewhere. So having those people identified and giving them the heads up on who they might want to approach, or organising the conversation to start for them, is a great idea.
And on mentoring, that's a really good point, Lee, that it's a two-way type of role. So I think it's something where there has to be quite a strong relationship between the two people involved to make sure that it works. And John, I know again that you've been involved in a lot of those mentoring type relationships and seen how it can work or how it can end up a bit of a disaster.
Yes, so if it's done well, it has a lot of benefits to both parties. And interestingly, I was at the Institute of Management yesterday and we were talking around the table about what's happening in business and so on, and AIM run a business mentoring program where they ask for volunteer mentors in the business world to mentor other business owners and help them grow their businesses. And they were saying that the number of people putting their hands up now, and this is voluntary, the number of people putting their hands up to be mentors has grown quite dramatically. and they put it down to the fact that there's a lot of baby boomers now retiring, getting out of their businesses, and they're looking for something to do. And so this is an opportunity for them to give something back, but also have something interesting to do in their retirement. And so I'm sure the same thing would be happening in the smaller communities as well.
Just another opportunity, I guess, to help in the transition process is thinking about how can we involve people in perhaps smaller working groups, like Lee mentioned, the subcommittees there. Are there ways we can get people involved in an informal process so they can assist staff either moving in or moving out of the CRC and start to bring those skills in there as well? So we've covered a fair bit there about staff transitioning. It'd be interesting now to have a quick chat about the surprise departures, things that we weren't expected, weren't on the radar, and how we go about managing those. John, it'd be good to hear your views on how what we need to think about in terms of those sudden departures and when perhaps it turns into a crisis type situation.
John Lennon allegedly said, "Life's what happens while you're making your plans." So all this succession planning and transition planning, it's all very good and you definitely should do it, but there are going to be things that happen that are unexpected, that can create a major crisis and can impact on the operations of the CRC. So let's have a look at some of those. Obviously the sudden departure of a key person, and here we see Lee getting on a jet plane with a cocktail because she's won lotto, so she wishes.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that can happen, but people can depart an organisation suddenly for all kinds of reasons and all kinds of circumstances that are outside of their control. So of course the issue here is, well, how do we maintain the operations of the CRC if that happens? So going back to having that succession plan in place and preparing for all the scenarios that could possibly come up. So a bit of scenario planning and having people, like we said before, anointed people that you're grooming to take over roles so that if somebody does depart suddenly, you can bring someone in temporarily to fill that role. Lee, have you experienced any sudden key person departures?
Oh, I suppose I haven't known you guys long enough, but in all honesty, I'd have to say I'm a living example. About 5 or 6 years ago, I had a crisis in my life and had to step out of the CRC with about 48 hours notice. It was a year or more before I could come back on a part-time basis, and I wasn't guaranteed a position after that. But that crisis was well handled because we had some good processes in place and we had identified some key people who could step in. I didn't know it was coming, so it wasn't that we did it because I had something looming in the future. It just happened, and we were so fortunate that we'd had someone give us the heads up about identifying those key people. So they struggled for a little while, but the support and mechanisms that were in place made a huge difference. So hopefully next time I depart, it will be on a jet plane with a cocktail. But I didn't come back into the CRC and take over and resume my position. That person held that position then until they chose to depart, and I applied just like other people apply. I came back as a volunteer and did stuff. So my departure was of a crisis nature, and it did, or could have, I should say, left a big hole. But it left, I'm glad to say that it left a little hole, and I would be sad if it hadn't, but certainly the things we had in place allowed it to keep going. So we identified the key committee people who could step in if there was something that needed to be dealt with of an urgent nature. We had processes in place. We had identified staff who had the ability to step in on a base level and be able to take over, and we had volunteers who were always waiting for the opportunity to step up to other duties in our CRC. So please don't sit there thinking it'll never happen, because believe me, it happens when you least expect it.
Okay, thank you, Lee. And one of the key points you made there, Lee, was about systems and processes. Again, the more systems and processes an organisation has, and the better they are, the easier it is for that organisation to survive a crisis or a sudden change of personnel. And the other thing closely tied into that is something that we covered quite extensively in episode 3, and that's about having good information management systems in place. So make sure that all the key information and knowledge that's required to run the CRC is in the systems and processes and not in the individual. You know, it's like in a business, when you take a key person out of the business needs to keep running. The CRC needs to keep running if you lose people from key positions. And so if that, you safeguard yourself as much as possible, almost like trying to insure against it by making sure that the systems, the data, the information is available to everybody to continue on. I think I've laboured that point, but Andrew, have you got anything to add to that?
No, I think you covered it pretty well there, John. It's really just being quite clear on what's needed in place and basically where your life jackets are at all times.
Okay, so maybe now, Andrew, talk to us about interim management plans and some things you can do on that front.
Good call. So it's really starting to think about what to do when things go wrong. And nowadays it's not unrealistic to think about what could be the potential mega disasters or minor disasters that are going to hit your CRC. And it could be something at fire, flood, something like a power surge. I reckon would cause a bit of havoc on a CRC if you're not well prepared for it. So to me, it's starting to really think through what are some of these disasters that are going to cause havoc for us and what are we going to do about it. So disaster recovery plans are one of those critical things. If you're talking risk management, it may not be probable, but in terms of its impact, it could be severe. So to me, it's starting to think through some of those what are we going to do type areas. And one of the first things you can do is have what's called, John's named this a step-in strategy. So having somebody near locally who can step in and help sort things out. So in the case of if you've got a staff member who can't make it in, or if you need somebody with specific skills to get your CRC back on track, have them either within the community or nearby perhaps, so they can come in and get things back on track. And Lee, you mentioned earlier that you had a former CEO working in a mentoring type role. Having somebody like that who has those organisation-wide skills could be pretty useful in that kind of role. Would understand what fits where and be able to jump in at any time with perhaps with their cape. I'd make them a cape. They could just jump in and say, "Jock's on the outside, off we go."
Oh, that's not an image. I've got to get rid of that. Yeah, I do agree. But also remember, we're a network, so the step-in strategies could be on a baseline level too, of identifying the CRCs around you and making a pact that if something happens on a local level, a disaster, a roof comes off, or there's an unexpected, loss in the centre or something, that you agree that, you'll commit some of your staff time to help that other CRC, knowing that you too have that commitment back on your side. So remember, we're a network and we can also utilise that. So if you can't get it on a local level, then look out that little bit further.
So really having relief staff that can sit within the CRC or within your community can be people that you can turn to when you really need it most. And again, I would seem, again, similar to the mentoring arrangement, I think people would be chuffed to be asked, to be honest.
Yes.
They'd be thinking, well, you obviously value my skills and experience enough to rely on me when the chips are really down.
It's a really valid comment, because most of us in life like to be needed. So it's amazing how many people in your community that are out there doing stuff, and if you ask them for help and you genuinely need it, they'll down tools and come over and they'll help you do whatever it is you need to do. And we've found too that we had a roof blow off a couple of years ago, which caused a few minor issues for us and was a minor disaster, I suppose. And people just came out of the woodwork. People came with their ladders, people came to help cover stuff up. We found that once people felt that they could contribute, they really wanted to. So it's the same on the staffing level. If you've got a staffing issue, there are people out there, you've just got to look for them. And like I say, if you're in a little town and they're hard to find there, then just look that little bit further away.
So to me, it's always be on the lookout for where these people are and how they can assist you, and don't be afraid to ask them to come and give you a hand.
That's actually part of your team effort there, because once you get that team feel and you're all working in the same direction, every now and then someone will come through our centre or they will be involved with us and do something, and someone in our group will go, actually, did you think about such and such? They might make a really good. And it starts that conversation amongst us, because we're always constantly just looking out for how we can value add on the opportunities that arise.
Yeah, and Lee, you were saying to me earlier that you have a lot of your people on your management committees or on different other management committees around town.
Just about a prerequisite with us. We have some pretty good plans in place, and we try to be involved on a local level so that we're not just an insular little group, that when our group comes together we've also got some feel about what's happening in our community, and that's made a really big difference, because when we value add in our CRC, so we're increasing our governance training and doing sustainable stuff, that's then filtering out to the committees that they work on, and in turn the people in that committee then filter it out again. So we see it as a way of having a flow-on effect, so every investment we make in our board and our staff flows out to the rest of the community with ease with that in place.
Brilliant. So it sounds to me like you've done really well in looking at that resource pool, who's out there and how we can bring them into the fold. Let's take it further and just thinking a bit more about getting really clear on the implementation of the succession plan. John, I'd like to hand over to you to take us through that part of things, if you could.
Sure. We've talked a lot and we've used the words planning and plan and strategy and transition a lot. And when I'm talking to CRCs, when I'm talking to other not-for-profits, something that they come back with all the time is, well, what's the point of planning? What's the point of doing all that strategizing? Because we've got such a small pool of people out there in our community or in our area that we're working in that, you know, there just aren't the people out there. They're just things. It's no point in planning because it's never going to happen. And so my response to that always is that, you know, planning and preparation plus opportunity equals luck. The people who are lucky in this world, the organisations that people look at and say, gee, they were lucky, are typically the ones that have been doing the most planning. And the point I want to make here is that we all know in the real world with CRCs and other not-for-profit organisations that, yes, there can be a shortage of people, there can be a small pool to draw from. But the point is, and this happens in all walks of life, if you're planning and preparing and you know where you want to go, then it's amazing how many more opportunities you see that you wouldn't otherwise have seen. Because once you're doing the preparation and planning, you're having the discussion, basically your sensors are going up. And so subconsciously, you're looking for those things and you see more of them. And then you put the two things together, your planning plus that opportunity, and suddenly you get a good outcome. And then people will say, gee, they were lucky, weren't they? Well, you know, I'll ask Andrew and Lee I'll ask you both for your opinion on that. But to me, there's no such thing as luck. It all comes down to being prepared and planning and seeing the opportunities. Your comments, please.
A friend of mine, John's an agronomist, and one of her pet hates were people who said about one farm who were lucky to get a better yield or lucky to get better performance or better quality from, say, from their chickpeas or lentils or whichever crop you're growing, and it just used to drive her nuts because they'd actually done some really good planning. They'd had a good fertiliser strategy in place and had the rotations. Everything was spot on, so when they actually got the rain they needed, they were going to get maximum response to that. So she'd be at my in-laws' place and they'd be saying, oh, gee, so-and-so was lucky, they did really well. And it's like, she'd be just, I said, Kate, calm down, do not hurt my in-laws, please, I need them. So it really just showed to me that, you know, she was really big on planning means you can take the most of those opportunities.
Yeah, and contingency planning, you know, with those farmers, I'm sure the lucky ones, would have contingency plans. You know, what happens if we don't get the rain? What happens if we don't get this or this happens? They would have something else to do.
Yeah, plan B would be, well, I'll go and alter my fertiliser strategy post sowing. So things like that.
Plan B could be as simple as asking what they did to attract that to happen, so that you're not even reinventing the wheel. On a CRC basis, how often do we all hear out there, wasn't such and such lucky their CRC got a funding grant or their CRC got, and we have to learn to step back and go, well, actually, we didn't get it because we didn't even put an application in or we weren't aware of it. So perhaps what we need to be doing is finding out how they create that luck. it isn't a given. It's a thing that you work hard towards, and ring them. How did you get that? How did you know about it? So that next time you're in that space and you can find out about those things. So please, the more we put in and the more we share as a network, the more we will all benefit.
So create your own luck.
Yeah, let's all become lucky. Let's become the lucky network, not just the lucky CRC.
The message is do your planning. It's about implementation. Take action, do your planning, be prepared, work through some scenarios, some worst case scenarios, work through some what ifs, and have a plan B. As Andrew said, there's a plan B for if things don't go according to plan. So make your own luck. I think we've laboured that enough. Andrew,
Yeah,
how would you like to sum up for us?
I'm a bit of a plan D man myself, because who knows what's going to happen after plan B, and I think that's actually the sign of somebody who's a particularly good manager has plan D when B hasn't sort of come to fruition. So let's think about what we've covered in this episode in terms of making sure that implementation happens. We've talked about the transition processes we need to have in place for both board members and staff, and we've also gone through thinking about crisis management and sudden departures, and how are we going to deal with that, what do we need to anticipate, and what is going to be plan D. And plan D is those interim management plans, thinking about who have we got around us in our community or even outside our community that we can bring into the fold as part of that process. And we've also talked quite extensively about how can we use that to maintain the operations of our CRC. So it's been another fantastic episode, and certainly I'd encourage you strongly, given that this whole episode's about implementation, is to follow up by getting out the workbook and writing down the 3 things that you want to address and actually put into place from this episode. That's the whole critical part. As John mentioned, it's great to have plans. If you don't have them implemented, then it's probably your efforts could be used better elsewhere. Thanks, John, for joining us. It's been wonderful to have you on board, and certainly some of those insights again about implementation.
Thank you, Andrew. It's been a pleasure to be here. I've learned a lot.
Excellent. And Lee, fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us from Pingelly, and again being so generous with your knowledge and those practical insights that you bring to the program.
It's always a pleasure, and I look at this as step 1. If we're all watching this and we're all participating and we're walking away, it's the first part of our implementation. We've started something. Thank you very much for the chance to be involved.
Always good to have you here. And coming up next, we're into episode 5, where we bring everything together from the previous 4 episodes of the program to help you think about what are the critical parts of a succession plan and how can you make them a reality. So for now, I'm looking forward to seeing you then, folks. So it's goodbye from you.
It's goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.
Toodle pip from me.
Thanks, folks. Look forward to seeing you in episode 5. Bye now.